Hey guys, it's Byron here and welcome to Byron's Reviews. This is the third episode of Request Month, a month dedicated to going over your requests. Today we're going to be taking a look at Mythica, A Quest for Heroes, the first film in a franchise of low-budget fantasy movies by Arrowstorm Entertainment. So let's get this show on the road and see what this film has to offer. Released in 2014 and directed by Anne Black, Mythica A Quest for Heroes was partly kickstarted and shot on location in Utah. The only other film I have seen by Arrowstorm Entertainment is Survivor, also released in 2014, so when going into Mythica, I was expecting some low-budget fantasy escapism. That said, let's go over the plot summary. In a historical world filled with magic and monsters, a young woman by the name of Marek is determined to escape her life of slavery for a life of dignity and friendship as a magician. And so, as she meets allies along the way, Marek sets off on a quest to save a princess's sister from the deadly grips of Shrek. Oh wait, that's another film. An ogre. Anyway, let's start with the writing of this film, which I think is a mixed bag. It's one of those films that jumps straight into the action with very little explanation as to create a fast pace. However, this carries on beyond just the first scene, and by the third scene, I still had so many questions in my head. The story leaves you, the audience, to put the pieces together yourself, and while I think that can work for some films, I don't think it works here. Seeing as this is the start of a franchise, I think that a gradual and explanatory introduction to the film's characters and world is essential, and I think Mythica not having this really holds it back in my eyes. Several minor characters seem like they're just there to move the plot along, and as such, a lot of their actions seem very forced. Examples of this include Marek's slave friend Egan and Marek's master who teaches her magical spells. And as a result of these things, I think that the pacing of the film is way too fast. On the other hand, it isn't all doom and gloom for Mythica, as I found Marek to be a very likeable protagonist. She had a very distinct, bubbly, lively and confident personality, which was expressed fantastically by the actress Melanie Stone. After seeing her be abused by those who own her at the start of the film, I really wanted to see Marek succeed on her journey for a better life. And in general, I really like to see strong female protagonists in films, and Mythica is no exception. She's like Katniss Everdeen 2.0. I quite like the other main characters too. They were introduced in very fitting and imaginative ways, which encompassed all their characteristics right from the get-go. An example of this is when Marek met Dagon, played by Jake Stormowen, in a cart full of hay. It was very funny, and if you see the film, you'll probably get what I mean. However, there is a romantic subplot between Marek and Dagon, which I really didn't like, as I thought it undermined Marek's whole character arc. Throughout the film, the thing Marek wants most is respect and dignity, and as the film goes on, she becomes more independent and learns to take control of her actions. But near the end of the film, Dagon drags Marek towards him and kisses her, despite Marek rejecting his advances previously in the film. On top of this, despite being a mostly likeable character, Dagon is in truth a bad person. He's a thief, he's immoral, and he disrespects women, and this stays true even at the end of the film. He learns nothing. So if he's supposed to be some sort of a prize for Marek, or if Marek is supposed to be some sort of a prize for him, I think it's very undeserved and counterproductive. It seems like this subplot is only there for the sake of forcing in a romantic element to widen the film's potential audience. Despite all this, once you put the unnecessary romance to one side, I think Marek's character arc still works, and it's one of my favourite things about the film. However, I'm sad to say that I do have another criticism about the writing. I think a lot of the film's aforementioned pacing issues comes down to one word: franchise. What I mean by this is over trying to make an actual solid and complete story. I think Mythica sometimes prioritises sequel bait or the possibility of future films. An example of this is how throughout the film there is another subplot about Marek's inner demons, and this is never explained or concluded, and the same thing goes for the stone, something that seems like a very important item in the film, but even that is never expanded upon fully, as it seems like it's leaving that job for the sequels. But let me get something straight, I don't inherently have an issue with sequels. It just, like most things, depends how they're done. If a story has been nicely wrapped up and made whole in one film, and people want to make a sequel merely to expand upon it and make it bigger, then I have no problem with that. But when elements of a film are intentionally left out for them to be concluded in sequels, that's when I have a problem, as when you finish the first film, it personally leaves me unsatisfied when the film ends. I think you can get away with things like this more in TV shows, as their structures are really designed for more expansive stories, but I don't think films work the same way, and I think they're designed to be one solid individual product. Like with most things though, there are exceptions, but in general that's my opinion on sequel bait.
Hello, this is future Byron interrupting past Byron to expand upon this point just a tiny bit more. Now I think that a lot of people would counter what I've just said by saying, well, what about cliffhangers? Are they not necessary? And to that I say that cliffhangers can be done right, but for a cliffhanger to truly work, I think instead of leaving elements of the film you've just watched unconcluded, it should instead introduce new elements for future films that don't rely on the story of the film you've just watched. I hope that makes sense. Now back to past Byron for the review.
Now I know I've been pretty negative on Mythica: A Quest for Heroes so far, so let's move on from the writing and go on to something the film's much better at, its overall style. Let's start with talking about the locations and set design. The set design helps to fill in some of the blanks that the writing couldn't, and it mostly does a great job of creating a very atmospheric and vivid world. Whether it's bustling pubs bursting with character with orange glowing lights, or snowy woods, there are very varied locations that are quite fun to look at. I think I may have even recognised a couple of the locations from Survivor, that other Arrowstorm Entertainment film I mentioned earlier. That's not a bad thing though. In fact, I like to see things like that in a film like this, because it shows how the creators of it are getting around budget restraints. Another example of this in Mythica is some of its lighting. While they're mostly handled okay, some of the nighttime scenes look to have been shot during the day and made darker in editing. I may be wrong, but that's what it looked like to me. On one side, some parts of the film can be a little hard to see, but what does shine through is the film's low budget nature, and that can be quite charming if it's your taste. Moving on from that, I really like the musical score by Nathaniel Drew. It fit the traditional old-fashioned time period really nicely with some of the instruments and samples it used, and I also loved how the music changed to fit certain characters with different sounds aligned to different people. On top of this, the soundtrack evolved dramatically near the end to mark a pivotal moment in Marek's character arc, as she truly became a strong, independent woman. When this happened, the music went from merely being orchestral to having elements of electronic and rock music, and it was awesome. Watching other reviews, I've heard a lot of people complain about films in general having very different styles of music, and they call it things like muddled, and I don't agree with this. Films by their nature do encompass many different themes and emotions, and I think it's only right for the soundtrack to reflect this complexity. To do this, different styles of music are often very necessary, and I think Mythica is a fantastic example of this being the case. I'd also like to go over the editing of the film. It used some very creative and stylistic cuts with some of the flashback or mind-reading scenes, and this really did help to create an uneasy tone. On top of this, many dissolve transitions were used as two images merged into one another, especially in the scenes when the characters were moving from one location to another. These scenes were very long and exaggerated, but I think they really showed the large scale of the film very well. I also liked Mythica's dramatic use of slow motion shots. To finish off talking about the film's style, let's go over the special effects. For the most part, the effects in Mythica are CGI, and in terms of quality and how they merge into the live action shots, they're what you expect from a film like this. They're obviously not up to scratch with bigger budget films, but then again, I never expected them to be. So when judging CGI shots in B-movies, instead of necessarily looking at how well it merges into live action, I like to look at just the design of the CGI and simply how cool or creative it looks. And in this case, creatures like the ogre or this other four-legged creature look okay. They're pretty detailed, but they're pretty standard for what you expect from this kind of fantasy film. That said, I suppose they worked and served their purpose of providing many fantasy genre pleasures, and that kind of goes for a lot of the things with the style of this film. While I think the style is mostly very positive and well done, I do think that it is very, standard. It reminds me a lot of films like Lord of the Rings, and it's kind of just, very what you expect.
Hello, this is Future Byron once again, and I think I could have explained this last point a bit better. The main thing I'm trying to say is that in terms of style, Mythica kind of lacks a distinct character, because with B-movies, as generic as some of their plots may be, in terms of style and how they're put together, they are often really distinct and creative, and I think Mythica, in trying to be like Lord of the Rings, loses this charm. And to me it just came across as a little dull, boring and forgettable as a result. But I suppose this is more of a personal preference of mine, and judging it by the style the film's going for, which is a more serious and less tongue-in-cheek one, I suppose it does do a good job, so I can't hold it against it that much. Once again, I hope that made sense, and back to past me.
As such, it may not stand out in comparison to other films, but in terms of just some nice, relaxing fantasy escapism, I guess it works on these levels. And just going back to that ogre I mentioned earlier, I have a feeling that the film's script wanted it to be a lot scarier than it actually was. I mean, not that the ogre didn't necessarily look threatening, it did. It's just the fact that it used one attack throughout the whole film for the most part. It swiped its arm and attacked enemies that way, and it got old quite fast. As well as just CGI though, Mythica did have some use of practical effects, which I did appreciate. Aside from some pretty cool looking orc costumes, there were some really badass practical effect spiders in the film's climax, and I love spiders in fantasy films. For instance, I loved the spider scenes in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and the spider scene here was awesome. Now let's wrap this all up and move on to the conclusion. So, what did I think of Mythica: A Quest for Heroes? Honestly, I wanted to like it more than I actually did. Aside from the many script issues I mentioned earlier, there just wasn't really anything to make it stand out. Mythica, for me anyway, just lacked that extra oomph, and it seemed a tiny bit bland. This was highlighted even further when I compared it to some other fantasy films I've seen lately. For example, it couldn't match the storytelling of the 2008 film Ogre, and it couldn't match the cheesy charm of the Darkest Night trilogy, and as a result it was just kind of there, unable to find a place. At the same time though, there is nothing wrong with just an average generic fantasy movie. As such, if you're a fan of the genre, this film should deliver the many conventions you know and love, such as magical spells, monsters and sword fights. And taken on these terms, I can imagine Mythica being a passable late night bit of escapism in the vein of films like Lord of the Rings. It is very middle of the road in my opinion, but if you can get over the issues I've mentioned and get enjoyment out of a very average fantasy movie, then maybe you'll get enjoyment out of it and give it a watch, but otherwise I'd give it a miss. But I think I have the unpopular opinion about Mythica here, as a lot of people clearly like it, as I think it's on its 5th film right now. So if you're a fan of Mythica, please let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, because I'd love to hear what you guys love about it. I'm genuinely curious to hear your opinions, even if they contradict mine, because, I don't know, maybe I just don't get it, or maybe I've taken Mythica in the complete wrong way. Let's get a discussion going. This all said though, I hope you enjoyed this review. This film was requested by moviemac Reviews, so thank you very much moviemac for requesting this flick. moviemac Reviews has a great YouTube channel, and like me, he does film reviews, but his are accompanied by quite funny and quirky animated images. So if you want to check out his stuff, I'll leave a link to his channel down in the description. He also wanted me to review the other Mythica films too, and as I hinted at in my last monthly update, that was my intention, but it's been a bit of a hectic week and I just haven't got the chance. But I do have the next 3 films in the Mythica series on DVD, and I will check them out at some point, and who knows, maybe I'll even review them. On a similar note, I'd just like to take this opportunity to apologise for any late videos there have been lately, because I know last month's video was late and this video is gonna be late too. It's just been a very hectic week. I've had plenty of exams at college to do, and there have been a lot of social things I've had to take care of as well. But things seem to be clearing up and getting out of the way now, so I think by next week I'll be able to get videos out on time consistently again. So thank you guys for bearing with me, I really do appreciate it. And if you want to keep in touch with me in terms of how I'm doing with getting my video made throughout the week, be sure to follow me on Twitter and like me on Facebook. But until next time, I will see you later. Bye! I really hope people don't hate me for this fairly negative review.